What's up, Summoner? King Blair here. With the reveal of Belian, there has been a lot of outcry on whether or not she's healthy and good for the game, because primarily of her S2 being the first skill in the game that completely shuts the opponent from using a certain mechanic, that being the Soulburn mechanic. So, we're going to be talking about today is going to be about Belian. First, we will talk about her kit a little bit, not too much in depth, since I will make a video on that when she actually drops, since I will actually be pulling for her and testing her out. But mostly on this as to what it entails. Then we'll talk about why it's so big for Soulburns, and then down the line, is it healthy for the game? Answering the question title in the thumbnail. Whether it's good or it's unhealthy or healthy for the game, because the big idea is that since they're introducing mechanics that completely deny opponent from actually getting to play a certain way, it's pretty impactful, as well as the effects that it has on cleave control and power creep in the game. So with that, if you like the video, make sure you like, subscribe, and join this server. Link. Without further ado, let's get right into it. So as mentioned, super quick rundown. Again, it's not something I want to sit here and talk to you guys, since I will be making a video on her when she actually drops next week, right? Since her banner is coming very, very soon. But essentially, her S1 is going to be AoE, pretty basic, right? It's pretty cool because she's a knight and she can actually use Elris and have AoE attack that does really good damage, right? The ratios are actually pretty insane. It does more damage than Alphonse Cecilia S1, except that it's AoE. Just for reference, right? So that's really cool, and it can use Elris. Again, it has some counters to it. She's not a unit that has no counters. That's one of the things I do want to mention now, is that her kit does have counters, right? Because she's forced to AoE, she loses a lot of things like Cross, she's had Bologna, Violet and Rem that can proc counters on her, right? So she definitely does have counters. The other part of her S2 is that she can do the extra attack when it's her turn, one that does decrease speed and decrease hit chance. So nice little control aspect. S3 is honestly nothing crazy either. It just gives her increased defense, does decent damage, and provokes, which can be pretty nice, since it does set up for you surviving longer, since you are going to be a knight. So now that we mentioned that, the big skill is going to be the S2, and the part of the most discussion, and primarily the reason why this video is made. Shackles of Suppression, and it really does look like a suppressive skill. So what this skill is going to be doing is it completely blocks the opponent from getting souls. This was confirmed in the community, in the Discord for Epic 7, the official Epic 7 Discord. One of the community managers said that they checked, and this does block Book, Tengul's Tome, right? So this skill has no counterplay. What I mean by that is that, again, this is the first time we have a skill that just completely blocks a mechanic in the game, that being Soulburn. And that has far more reaching effects that you may see at first, because first let's look at how typically units used to counter, then we'll actually talk about the soul aspect. So typically, how you would counter a problematic mechanic or a problematic hero is you would release a unit that was good into that certain type of matchup or punishes the skill. For example, one of the units that I'm going to be showing is going to be none other than Polides, who's an incredible unit, because she stops non-attack skills, she punishes people from using non-attack skills, as well as cutting CR game by 50%. That's pretty good, right? But at the end of the day, Polides doesn't stop you completely. You're still able to do non-attack skills. You're still able to get CR push, right? It's not like she's saying you don't get CR push. She doesn't shut that down 100%, right? But unlike Belian is legit coming in and saying, no, you just don't get souls, right? Now let's look at another example. For example, Landy, right? Because counter mechanics used to be very, very popular for Landy and Senate, right? Well, the S3 does not trigger counterattacks, right? That's the way that they counter counters. They have moves that don't trigger counterattacks. Same thing with Stennis S1. What we have to realize is that this is a skill that Landy has to use. There is counterplay because it's only Landy that is able to do that S3, and it's only on her S3, right? It's not on S1. For Stennis, it's on the S1. But again, there's counterplay to her because it's just Stennis, right? You're still able to trigger counterattacks. Like with things like Mercedes, you're able to get around it. And you're still able to overall use them against other heroes in the game. Whereas Belian, just for existing, you're blocking the opponent's mechanic. So that's a really clear distinction, and why I mentioned it's the first skill in the game to do that, right? There's no other mechanic in the game that just for a unit existing, you're blocked out of a mechanic, right? You're still able to use it. Yes, are there oppressive units? Of course, there's already oppressive units, but this is the first time we get a unit that completely cuts a mechanic, right? This would be like if Rowana, for example, if Rowana, instead of saying, oh, when the enemy counterattacks, you heal and you get CR push, right? It would be like saying if you couldn't dual attack and counter attack as long as Rowana was on the board. right? That's a lot more impactful. That's a lot scarier. That's a lot stronger than just punishing the mechanic and the opponent using the mechanic, because you can actually still get around this, right? You can still use unhealable. You can still counterattack. You can still get the benefits of counterattack. You can still kill units like with Seaside. You can still kill units with S2 before they heal, right? So that's where that aspect comes into play, where yes, there are mechanics that actually shut things out, but nothing like we've seen in Belian, where it's just her existing shuts out the mechanic. But now, why are souls so important? That's the next question we have to answer. And it's, are souls really that important? Because a lot of people seem to think that souls and book are not that strong, right? So if we look first at book, book is the best mage artifact, arguably, because soul burns in this game are so impactful, right? And we do know, again, the stream didn't say it, but the community manager confirmed it. Again, we can wait and see if it's actually going to happen. But it blocks this artifact completely, right? This artifact is useless. If you have a book, useless. You have to start with 0 souls if Belian is on the board, right? It doesn't matter if you have this artifact or not. Now, that is very impactful because a lot of different teams actually rely on this, as well as units become significantly stronger when they have this artifact than when they're not. And souls as a whole is a way that you actually get advantage in the game, right? So who are some units that use this, and why is this such a strong artifact? And it did need checks, and that's something we'll talk about in a second. But some of the units that do use this artifact that are units that you wouldn't normally think about that easily. But first, let's think of Spectre Tenebria, right? Spectre Tenebria is a really strong unit right now in today's meta, right? She's arguably one of the best DPSs, and she does a lot of work. Why? Because she's a mage that can carry book. She fits into cleave and aggro teams, as well as into bruiser teams. And the big thing about it is with souls, you're able to get extra turns, and this S1 just does so much damage that you can either cycle quicker to your S3 to stun, or you can just do a ton of damage onto enemies on command. And for aggressive teams, you're able to just get an uncounterable S1 burst damage that there's not a lot the opponent can do in that situation, right? So it's one of those mechanics that's really, really powerful, but if you don't have souls, Sten is not that scary, right? Because then she just becomes a very normal unit, right? She just becomes a unit that can hit 2 enemies. That's good, and she's still strong, but without the threat of a soul burn and the threat of an execution just being able to get immediately just popped, she becomes significantly more balanced, right? And souls are what makes her so good, right? We can also look at something like Carrot. Carrot dominated the last RTA meta season, but without her being a mage, if she did not have access to book, she would have not been nearly as strong. Because the thing that makes soul burn so scary on this is that you're able to S3, apply the burns, and immediately get an extra turn and pop the burns. That's what really pushed her over the edge, because without that extra turn mechanic, you can easily cleanse her, right? You can just cleanse your allies. There's several really good cleansers, right? Make Chloe, Amelia now. Granted, Amelia did bring her down, but there was a lot of cleansers, even things like DJ Bazaar, right? But the thing that made her so threatening is you could come in, grip, start, and then immediately just burn and pop, as well as cycling this very low cooldown S3, right? Very major things. The soul burns are the ones that are carrying. And then now, the reason why people are really hating on Belian, especially the cleavers, is going to be because right now, Pavel is arguably the strongest cleave. And there's several other cleaves that actually do use souls, right? Like, think Polides, think even Light Angelica cleaves, Spectre Tenebria cleaves, right? They're always bringing souls to do extra damage, even Challenger Dominio. But with Pavel, he gets an extra turn, gives attack buff, and then it's immediately able to unit. And if you're not able to outspeed a Pavel cleave, you're not likely to tank it, right? It's a unit that you're forced to ban and hope that you have the stat check, right? So cleave was becoming quite strong because it was becoming a stat check. If you didn't have a way to threaten the speed, or you don't have like super strong tank gear, or if your opponent has better gear than you, you were getting cleaved, and there was not a lot you could do about it, right? And that was just the way it was. So Pavel was very strong, but the reason again was the souls. Without souls, Pavel's not nearly as scary. He just becomes an AoE damage dealer that gives attack buff, not an AoE damage dealer that gives attack buff to an ally and also one shots, right? That difference is huge. But this extends way farther than just the bruiser heroes and why souls are strong. This also does extend to even bruisers, right? When we look at a unit like a Tywin, who right now is having a massive resurgence, the reason a Tywin is so strong is because of the S3 rotation. How does he get that? With Soul Burn. With the Soul Burn, you're essentially able to keep the opponent super locked down where they get 0 advantage if they're not able to close every other turn, which is not something that a lot of people can actually do, right? So with that, that's one of the big reasons why Tywin was so oppressive, was that soul burn. And a lot of different heroes rely on those souls. These are just some examples of the units that really rely on their souls. But think of a late game crawl. We're able to soul burn S3 and set up the increased defense. And things like Fallen Cecilia, you get more advantage. Last Rite of Crawl, when you're ramping up in a fight, if you don't soul burn, it's going to take a little bit longer for you to get back to your skill. Whereas soul burning, you're getting that skill significantly quicker, and you're able to ramp up the game to a point where the back. Right? And we can talk about different units. Things like Charlotte being able to cycle their S3 and just do dummy AoE damage with this S3, with the soul burn. Sandy getting the extra turn. There's several units that use soul burn mechanic because it's that inherent mechanic in the game, and it's one of the big parts why these units are good. So now that we know soul burn is important, now that we know why Belian is so weird, what does this mean for the game, right? What does this mean for Epic 7 moving forward and everything, and why are people concerned? Well, the big reason, there's the good and the bad. So the good is that souls didn't need a check. There was no real ways to check besides outspeeding, right? With a Sid who could steal souls, or a Tywin who could slowly take away some advantage with the S1. And even people thought a Tywin's S1 was oppressive, right? But with Belian, you now are essentially putting a massive counter to soul team. If someone is putting souls on their team, they're getting hard punished because they're either forced to ban this unit or eat whatever you have for the rest of your team, right? So even a Sid and Belian, there's not a lot that a Soul Weaver Cleave can, or Soul Cleave can do, right? Because she's very tanky, you're not going to be killing her, and her effect takes place immediately. It just stands there. So that part, it didn't need to happen. Most people can agree that soul burns are very strong, and some form of check is always nice. The part where we start getting to the negatives, and this is where there's quite a few, the negatives is going to be that this is a skill that has zero interaction. And that's my personal problem with it, is that this is a passive that does not have an interaction. There's no counterplay to it, essentially. It's either you rely on souls or you don't. And for the most part, you do rely on souls, right? So it doesn't really have that much counterplay, and it's not interactive. Whereas Polides, you actually have to like, okay, I actually have to interact with Polides, right? I actually have to think, I want to use my non-attack skill, so I want to use my non-attack skill, right? There's at least a level of decision making. Whereas Belian is just like, if she's on the board, you don't get souls, right? It's just a passive thing, right? There is no real counterplay. And because of that, because it's so quick, the other reason is also people are thinking, I don't know if this will happen, but it has something to do with power creep. And it's that if they're stunning with mechanics like this, and they're showing that they are okay giving units mechanics like this if their kit is not something that's oppressive, what does that mean later on? Are they going to release things that can stop counterattacks, right? Like, what if there's a unit like Rowana or like Belian where if you have this unit on the board, there's no counterattacking, right? That could very much happen. That is something that can definitely occur now, and it's not out of the realm of possibility, and that is going to lead to power creep. So how would this lead to power creep, and why does Belian lead to power creep a little bit? Well, we kind of got a trial run a little bit of what I imagine will happen if Belian does end up becoming a problem, which I don't think she particularly will, but it is a possibility. But when we look at someone like Samurai Seria, we're starting to see units. She's the first unit ever to not need souls to do her soul burn. So if it actually becomes something that Belian becomes oppressive, we will actually see units like Samurai Seria that bypass the soul mechanic. And I could very much see an artifact that says your first soul burn does not require souls, right? That really does lead into the problem of, are we going to get power creep, right? Which is not something that we always had in this game. But it's something that we're starting to see more and more. There are units that are just strictly better versions of it. We're seeing mechanics that are just strictly better than older mechanics, right? So it's definitely something that's becoming more and more prevalent. And whether you like it or not, it's going to be happening. Units are going to be becoming stronger and stronger, right? With things like Angel Light Angelica, right? For example, she's just a better version of the Lebanon Roman, right? She just does whatever he does, but stronger. And she's pushed the meta up ahead for control. Because F10 was getting more and more counters to her. And now they release a unit where control counters can't actually properly deal with her that way, right? Which is crazy to think about, that we got into a point where the traditional control counters don't do that good into Angel Light Angelica because of how unique she is. So it's something that we're going to start seeing more and more with units like Belian, and it's something that we will have to accept. So overall, is it something that is negative for the game? Depends how you look at it. If you looked at it from a balance standpoint, we did need something for souls, although this is a little harsh restriction. It's a very harsh restriction. Just saying no souls is very harsh on a unit. That's pretty crazy. But it is what it is, right? And the part that we're gonna have power creep, and that's something that every game has. Although it's not something that I particularly enjoy, it is something that's becoming more and more prevalent. So definitely, for me, not the best, because it does show that Smilegate's not afraid to release very broken mechanics to try to counter things, problems. But at the same time, it's going to be an interesting time when they try to release counters to her if she becomes a problem. I don't particularly think that Belian is going to become a problem, because she does have counters, right? She's not a unit that's just uncounterable, right? It's just this skill is the concern. That this skill is you can't interact with this skill. It's uninteractable, right? This skill is uninteractable, and that's just the way. But that is going to be all I have for you guys today. I hope to see you next time. Peace.